Welcome to the Creative Push, an intimate and diverse artist interview series. Here, artists and makers of all kinds share tips, advice, knowledge, and inspiration that you can learn from. I'm your host, Sherry O'Neill, a photographer, artist, writer, and educator. This series is a part of the Learn and Create platform to help artists further their education in creativity, art, and business. Today, I have Buddy Jackson, a fine art artist. Buddy, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I had a grandfather on my mother's side that was a sign painter. He also was an artist. He drew and he painted, and his father actually painted as well, my great-grandfather. So I was exposed a little bit at a really young age, and my granddad and I used to, when I was a little boy, we'd sit around in the kitchen and draw, and he'd give me kind of challenges of things to try to draw. And I remember one of the things he did was that he would try to get me to be able to make expressions of emotion, but I could only use 2 dots, like eyes, eyebrows, and a mouth. But he'd say, okay, like perplexed. And I'd have to try to figure out just using those.
And how old were you when you were
I was little.
That's hard.
Yeah, it was hard. 6 or 7. But it was fun, and I think that's what attracted me to making art. It's just one of the things in life that I always loved.
So it started with drawing and kind of sketching?
Yeah, normal kid stuff, I think.
And where did you grow up?
East Tennessee, Knoxville. I guess in high school, I've said before that some of my biggest influences were comic books and Mad Magazine. Kind of a dream of mine was, to be a Mad Magazine cartoonist. But it never really synced in with me that real human beings were somewhere making that stuff. It just seemed like, it was being created. And so I never really thought it was something I could do. I went to UT in a hometown, University of Tennessee, and kind of naively just signed up as a painting major. And then moved to Nashville in the mid-'70s to try to make money making art.
Did you graduate?
I did not. No, I think I started my last year, and then my advisor, but also my painting teacher, he came in one day, and I was like up in the attic of this old building on campus working away, and he came in and he's like, so you're going to graduate this year, right? And I was like, yeah. And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, paint. He's like, you can't make a living doing paintings. You can't survive. And he said, you need to, get a teacher's certificate so you can teach art or something. And I was like, no, but I don't want to. And he was like, well, it's either that or commercial art. And I was like, well, I guess I'll just do commercial art because I'm not a teacher, not a classroom kind of guy. And I ended up leaving. And I came to Nashville thinking about going to a commercial art school, but ended up just working in a printing company and ad agencies.
That was in 70?
I moved here in 75.
So you started working at a printing company. Explain kind of what your job, what you were doing.
I was learning the production of graphic arts. I didn't know it at the time. Most of the people that did design work and art direction, their schooling was, they taught them how to be designers and art directors, where I was taught how to manufacture your ideas as opposed to execute your ideas. And I think it gave me a leg up because to do proper design work back then, you really had to know printing processes and paper and all that stuff. My job there was doing paste ups and typesetting. Every week we'd do this little newsletter for the Rotary Club, and I'd get a little package from them. I'd go pick it up, and I'd bring it in, and I'd take the copy, and I'd set all the type, and then I'd take their photographs, put them on a camera, and put dot screens in them, and make film, and I'd strip all the film together and then burn a plate and print it and fold it and then deliver it. And I did it for about a year and then went to work for a small ad agency here. Worked for them for 7 years maybe. I was hired as like a production artist, and then I left as a senior vice president and creative director. Taught myself. Mainly I was doing the opposite of what I saw a lot of people doing, and started my own company after that.
And what were the type of accounts that you were doing? Like what kind of work were you working with when you started your own company?
I got a portfolio put together from my agency days, and then I targeted people that kind of bought art for a living. There were those people that existed in corporate world back then that were marketing directors. And so I went to the publishing houses and the record companies first. because they had a steady chain of work. Honestly, because of my marketing background in the record business, I started doing ads and stuff for them first, writing and concepting ads and design and production. We were still using typesetters and color separators. Started my company in '83, and I think it was probably in the later '90s. We were one of the first design companies to go digital. It was a gradual process. That process took about a decade.
And you had your company for how many years?
25 or so.
25 years. And so how many people did you have working for you at that point?
At the most, I think we had around 16, but I think it averaged around 7 over the years.
So what made you get out of it?
I just got tired of it, honestly. By the end, we were working for all different facets of industry, and we were doing catalogs and advertising, all kinds of shit. But I remember I was hired to do an annual report. It was the third year in a row I was doing the annual report. I went to this meeting with their CFO and the CEO and marketing director and all that stuff. And annual reports at the time, because they're publicly held, they had to publish a report by law that had to contain all this stuff. So I guess somebody along the line decided, well, if we're going to print all this stuff, we may as well put a brochure on the front. And that's how these really beautiful annual reports came around. You know, normally you'd have a creative strategy of some kind. You know, we had a good year, we had a bad year. They were like, oh, nothing's really changed. It's just the same as last year. You know, you got my best 2 shots at this project, so here's my third. And Jeffrey Bunton at Bunton Advertising, it's about that time, contacted me, and he made me an offer to buy out the company, and I took it. Didn't work, but...
What caused you to just get out of the business?
I majored in fine art. That was my real goal. I think I just happened to be really good at the commercial art, even though my heart wasn't really into it. Really kind of hated advertising. I feel like it's fundamentally dishonest. And then, you know, at least I told myself that the design side was more honest, but that's kind of a lie too. It's all about branding and positioning and make this person look cool or that person look smart or whatever. And I was just kind of tired of it, and I've been doing sculpture for a while, more as a hobby, but I was shown at Zeitgeist, which was one of the nicer galleries, and getting some attention for that. And when I went over to the corporate side to Bunton, to this big ad agency, I was very sincere about it in the beginning. I thought, oh, this is going to be great, but it was really awful. I just wasn't cut out for the corporate land. I guess I've made myself basically unemployable. I got out and I had a non-compete that I'd signed with them, so I couldn't really go full-fledged back into the design and advertising world, and I was selling some sculptures.
When you had your design company, you won a lot of awards for the work that you guys were doing. Can you give me an example of some of the things you're most proud of?
I won 2 Grammys for packaging. They were both a band out of Austin called Asleep at the Wheel. They were Western Swing tribute records, and I did the Oh Brother, Where Art Thou stuff. I worked with almost all the Christian artists. I did a lot of work in contemporary Christian and started out actually doing the old Southern gospel and black gospel stuff. And then a lot of the country artists. I always laughed. I'd always get artists on the way up or the way down. I won a lot of awards for advertising for CSAC. I did all of their marketing stuff for a long time.
But you got along well with the artists themselves, didn't you?
Pretty much, yeah, for the most part.
So that's a big part of it.
Yeah. I remember at one point at Capitol Records, I'd started doing work for them and their art director. She called me in one day and she said, we've decided that we had a meeting and we made this decision that you and Virginia are basic opposites in personality and the way you approach projects. And so we figured out if a project wasn't right for Virginia, it was perfect for you, and vice versa. That week was a week that Capitol came in and fired everybody that worked. They were like, we're going to give you half of all of our projects for the next, foreseeable future. And then 3 days later, everybody got fired. We had a great client list. I was able to have a lot of fun, do some really cool projects.
I'm sure that world was very busy, and you're probably working around the clock, not a lot of free time.
Oh, it was awful. It was awful. One, I realized at some point that stress is not an environment, it's your reaction to the environment. And I just didn't get stressed very much. I wasn't afraid of deadlines. I wasn't afraid of working all night. I mean, I think that really frustrated some of the people that worked for me. I just didn't care. I was like, oh, we're going to have to work all night on this. And they'd be like, what?
So fast forward to the day, when you left, how did that feel to all of a sudden not have that stress?
It's very weird. And I've talked to a lot of friends that have left the rat race or whatever you want to call it. And, you go from this moment of being very much in demand, you're getting 80 emails a day and your phone's, ringing off the hook and you can't even catch up with all the people, to like radio silence. It's like turning off a switch, it's like none of that was there. Like nobody was calling, there were no deadlines to chase. And it was pretty weird, not fun. It took me a while to get my feet back under me.
Because you enjoyed it so much.
I mean, somewhat. I think I realized a long time ago that I'm not what I do. That partially defines me as a person, but not completely, And I really fought the whole game, like I tried very hard to be the same person at work as I am at home. And that's hard to do, to not put on this hat of like, oh, I'm a professional designer or brand manager or whatever. But I always just try to keep all that real. And it's hard to do that. Yeah, it was emotional. And I've watched a lot of people go through normal retirement, which I never have.
I would think that the emotional impact of that's tough because you're used to being really good at something that people want because you're in demand, to all of a sudden questioning everything that you were, even if the subject matter wasn't exactly what you wanted, you were still able to use that inner part of you that needed to let go of that energy.
It's a mixed bag. It's like I realized at one point, I think I was doing the sculpture on one side and I was selling some stuff. And I realized pretty quickly, this stuff's going to be around a long time. That 25 years of design work, 17 or 18,000 projects that we handled through that company in 25 years, it's all gone. Even the record projects, it's like most of those you find them maybe in a discount bin somewhere. But I realized it was just nonsense in terms of it's not art. It's an art. I think if somebody else is defining what your work's going to be, it's not yours.
The first year was probably pretty difficult.
Yeah, I built that studio right away and I was like, oh, I'm going to be a sculptor. and built that studio and I didn't go into it for 2 or 3 years. I had buyer's remorse in a huge way. I was like, oh my God, I spent all my money on this building and can't even stand to go in there. I mean, I think the biggest adjustment is going from an environment of having all these people around you. It was a lively place. There was a lot going on, and to the loneliest job in the world is a fine artist. I don't know any job that's less lonely than that. Sitting in a room somewhere by yourself with some medium in front of you that you're supposed to turn into something of value,
So you started getting back into doing sculpture, and you also paint.
Yeah, I didn't paint for a long time. I held this guilt, and I've read about it. It's a real thing, this creative guilt that a lot of people get, creative get. When they're not working, they feel like they're doing something wrong. And I definitely have that guilt of like, oh, what's the matter? Like I'm such a slug. And I always was like, oh, well, I'm going to do this stuff, and then I'll paint as a hobby. And I'd go home and I'd just force myself to try to paint something, and it'd just be shitty work and really stiff and stilted. And it was always like this, well, what am I going to paint? And then at some point I decided to do some sculpture. I'd had an injury in my hand and I'd had nerve damage in my right hand, and I was worried about that. And I thought that working with clay would be good therapy. So I started screwing around with clay, but I realized that working in 3 dimensions was different enough from what I did all day. It was separate, and I could get excited about it, where I couldn't get excited about the painting. So I just started doing sculpture. The last 5 or so, 10 years, I've opened myself back up to working in 2 dimensions, and then wasted 5 years doing a bunch of photography.
So tell me about the photography.
Well, I've always done figurative work, and actually this friend of mine's girlfriend, I just met her. She had moved here from Wisconsin. I was having a party or something, and she was probably half drunk, and she was like, we should shoot pictures. And I was like, I'm not a photographer. And she was like, oh, I've always wanted to do nudes. And I was like, well, if you talk to your boyfriend, is that okay? And she was like, oh, it's his idea. And I had taken some photos for like reference for sculptures and stuff, but not to live as photography, as photographs. So I did it as a lark, really. And so she came over, and I borrowed a camera, I think, and we started shooting. And I started falling in love with the process more than the images. I really liked, it's the only time in my whole life I'd collaborated, and when you're shooting somebody, it's a two-way street, and I started recognizing that, and I started feeling like, well, I kind of have a voice in this, I see so many photographers that have no voice, and they just flail around for a career and never have their own thing that they do, and I felt like I naturally had that from my painting and sculpture background and the way that I worked with figures and posed and stuff. So I got more and more used to it, and I found how to find models to work with.
And your house has beautiful light. The way the light comes through the glass is amazing. It's just pretty. I'm sitting here looking at you going, oh my God, I need to grab my camera.
I wish you could have seen it before all this cleaning went on, because this French film crew rented the house one time for a movie. They were doing a short, and they were all of the top brass were from Paris. And then all of the grunts were from Nashville, all the PAs. The DP came over and he was like, don't ever wash your windows. It's just the most beautiful light.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. I hope you're enjoying the Creative Push. These artist interviews are a labor of love, but it sure would help if you'd consider supporting this podcast with a small monthly donation to help sustain the work and time it takes for me to produce future episodes. You can click the support button, or you can click the link below in the show notes. Any support is greatly appreciated, and you can cancel at any time. Either way, I'm glad to have you here. Please subscribe and share. Now let's get back to the show. Explain your technique with the sculpture. How do you come up with your ideas? Where does the inspiration come from? What's the style?
Clay, mostly, is the medium. I'll do the original in clay, and then I'll make molds sometimes and then cast it in different materials, bronze being the most expensive. And but I also have cast in different kinds of plasters and cements and grouts and all kinds of stuff.
Do you have that stuff done locally?
I do it myself.
Oh, you do it all yourself? All of it? The whole process? Wow, that's big.
No, I don't do the bronze. I don't. It goes to a foundry in Memphis. I'll do maybe a nice bronze commission every year or so.
And they're all figurative?
Everything I've ever done has got people in it. There's just very, very few exceptions of that.
What about your paintings?
The sculpture went from early in my career, I was doing these kind of fantasy things. I was doing a lot of fat people, doing different things that fat people don't really do, and fat businessmen in ballet poses. And then when I got this injury and I started getting more and more and more into clay, I started getting more obsessed with realism, and I kind of regretted that since. I like working out of my brain better than trying to duplicate something in front of me. I just felt it was more mine. I began to look at anatomy as a vocabulary that I could learn, that I didn't need a human being in front of me to make a believable figure. I think I accomplished that. One of the things I've done is when I really feel stuck creatively is I'll switch up a medium. I'll be like, I'm going to do something I've never done before. And that's why I end up trying a lot of stuff. Oh, I'm going to try photography. I'm going to try this or try that, or I'm going to do watercolors. So I felt like I'd gotten just tighter and tighter and more strict and more strict. And then I kind of popped, I think. But I decided, I did this series, I would limit myself. So I'd say, okay, you have an hour, 2 hours, and you can only use 3 colors. And I went and bought all these pastels because I'd never worked in chalk. I did this series, Black Men. Almost all of them reside in one collection down in Florida. It's really funny. I was just trying to find this path of loosening up again and opening up the pathways between your brain and your hand instead of worrying about my eye and my hand so much, and that's how those drawings, they even have a folk art kind of feel about them, but not intentional. But that's just kind of where they ended up, But I did I did these giant pastels. They were like 8 feet tall and stuff, these big figures. But then I did a series of photographs. I'd take photographs I liked and then do paintings of them, try to loosen it up. And then recently did a series from old family photographs.
You've got very large printer, so you're printing large prints from figurative photography that you've done, and that's all available light. And then what's the process if you shoot with the Fuji Polaroid? What is the process to turn it into a large print?
Most of the photographers I know are so caught up in all the technical stuff, and I just don't have any of that. I don't care. When I edit, I just do shit I think's fun and go, the skin's blue. Like, I don't care. Cool, or it's not in focus. Oh, well. Probably all of the photographs I took with that Polaroid were out of focus. But even the little ones, they weren't very sharp.
What's your favorite size when it comes to photographs?
Oh, I like them big. The bigger, the better.
And what's the largest you've done?
44 by as long as you want to go.
You've got some where you've brought them into Photoshop and split them up and printed out pieces.
I think what I liked about it is that there's handwork involved. I would find a model I really jobbed with, and then, we shoot these images and we have this really nice, fun, creative day. And then I'd get in and I'd start editing the pictures, and I'd like them, and then I'd send to the printer, and I just didn't like, they just fell flat, Those digital prints didn't do much, and that's why I got into the dichromate thing, because it would take that digital image and fuck it up. You couldn't keep from it. You just had no idea what you were going to get.
And explain that process if you can, just a quick little overview.
Well, I'd take the image and I would print that on my big Epson printer on film. So I'd make a negative to the size that I was wanting to print. You mix a solution of dichromate, which is a crystal that's a light sensitive stuff, and then you mix that with gum arabic. You take watercolor pigment. That's what adheres to the paper. I couldn't find any real information on it. That's the prints that Steichen did.
Tell me what creativity means to you.
Creativity is in all walks of life. You can be a creative accountant, you can be a creative anything. And the top of all the fields are creative. It's just finding a new way of approaching an old problem.
What inspires you to create?
I don't know. I really don't. I bought a book one time that was supposed to, you read this book and you're going to find out what your creative motivation is. But it had the reasons people create, what are yours, there's these different motivators to choose from. And I like making stuff. I've never taken any of that too seriously. And, I just want to have fun at it.
What do you do when you get stuck?
I make bad art. I mean, that's true. There's a quote, and I don't know who it came from. The muse will only find you while you're working. I think it's the absolute truth. I think when you're sitting around waiting on the idea, I want to do something new. What's it going to be? And you wait, you're going to wait forever. But if you just get a piece of paper and start doing something, it opens up those channels. And the next thing you know, you're going to be like, oh, I know what I'll do. But you got to be willing to throw some shit away.
What do you want to learn that you haven't learned yet?
Maybe relationships. I'm not any good at those. I had some interest in casting glass, and I had hired a woman to teach me. And then I just realized at that point that cost of the investment was going to be really big, and that if this woman knew what she was talking about, it was like what I wanted to do. It was going to take a 30-day cooling process, 30 days to see what I got out of one casting. My kiln is going to be spoken for 30, with these big masses of glass, and so I kind of gave up on it. I saw a show this guy had done of these torsos in Colorado 30 years ago probably that was cast glass, and I just thought it was so beautiful. But he wasn't using Chihuly glass. It wasn't that clear, shiny. It was milky white colors, amber colors. It looked almost like stone, probably sandblasted or something.
What do you see for your future?
I guess keep doing what I'm doing. I'm at a crossroads of some sort. I'm getting old, so it's just kind of hard to know what's next. I know when I turned 60, I was like, okay, I'm going to work like I have 10 years left. Everybody's, oh, you're stupid, you're crazy, you got more than 10 years. I was like, you don't know that. I mean, this was well before COVID and all this stuff, and I said, but that's how I'm just going to behave that way. Well, 10 years basically I've been, and now I'm like, well, now what? So I always told myself when I turned 70 I was going to start drinking, but then I moved it to 80 when 70 started looming.
Do you use any social media?
Instagram.
And people can see your work there?
Yeah. It's mostly the photography.
And what about representation? Do you have a gallery or anything?
I show some small work at Stanford Fine Art out in Belmead, and I think we're getting ready to increase that a bit. Right now it's just small watercolors.
Thank you so much for letting me interview you. This was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, my intention is to offer inspiration that excites you to want to get out there and create something amazing. Be sure to check out some of the other episodes. There's more information below in the show notes, including links to other great stories, tips, and resources. Drop me a message or comment at any time, and I hope that you'll sign up to be a part of this creative tribe.